All right, are we ready to bring the jury back in? All right, we are ready for the cross-examination then?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Ray Crouch. I represent the state of Tennessee.
Nice to meet you.
I'd like to pass forward what has been previously marked as Exhibit 257 in this case. If you would, take a moment and familiarize yourself with the exhibit. And I note that in your report, I believe this is one of the medical records that you have already reviewed, but I just want to make sure you've had a chance to look at it again before we start.
Yes, this looks familiar.
Okay, great. So let me start off with asking some preliminary questions. We've heard from several expert witnesses in this case already. When you perform an assessment, an evaluation, and reach some conclusions, you have all relied to a great length on information being provided to you by not only the defendant but by other people. Is that right?
Sure. That's part of the assessment.
And is it important in order to provide an accurate assessment to receive accurate information?
As best as can be gathered, sure.
If you don't receive accurate information, what happens to your final conclusions?
Well, there's the chance of it being inaccurate, and that's why we try to triangulate the data as much as we can.
How do you triangulate for the defendant in this case when throughout assessments he provides known inaccurate information?
Well, that in itself is a symptom, isn't it? I mean, that's an inconsistency is a symptom of brain impairment, and particularly with memory impairments or frontal impairments and trauma, as I mentioned. There are certain times he might disclose things and certain times he wouldn't. So I do look at all of those kinds of things together.
Now, you said it's a symptom of what?
Brain impairment, trauma.
Is it also a symptom of mitigating his involvement in some role?
It depends, I guess, on what he's saying and where.
Okay. Well, what if he says in his initial assessment that one of his stressors is that his brother died 2 days before?
And I'm assuming then that's not true?
That's not true.
Right. Okay.
So how would you interpret that?
I'd have to interview him about that. I don't know.
Well, you did interview him.
I didn't interview him about that necessarily.
Well, you had this exhibit in your possession and reviewed it before you evaluated the defendant. Why didn't you ask him that?
Well, again, I don't memorize the records before I go in and see somebody.
I understand, but I'm asking, my very first question was, it's important for you to reach these conclusions to use correct and accurate information.
Okay.
And I mean, right out of the gate with the defendant, he provided inaccurate information.
To someone else. Yes, it looks that way.
Was known to you.
I must have read it. Now, can I remember everything I could read? No.
Well, let's read it now.
I'm going to ask you, unfortunately.
Okay.
At this late hour, my contacts are not working.
I know nothing. Starting right here. Subsequently, patient reports that his brother died 2 days before I shot the couch. The patient reports that the death of his brother significantly exacerbated his depressed mood and thoughts of suicide. I mean, that's just a blatant lie.
It is inaccurate, yes.
Well, it's
but
more than just inaccurate. He's telling...
Judge, I'm going to ask that you let the witness answer the question. He's asking you the question. You need to let him answer.
Sure.
Mr. Stein, please let the witness answer the question, but then, Doctor, if you will just answer that question and then move on to the next question.
I have to ask a clarifying question. When did he die? The brother?
Pardon?
The brother. I'm missing it in my mind.
Well, the brother's still alive.
He's alive, right? Yeah.
He's
So it's the father.
alive today.
Yeah. So this, it looks like he's telling him something that's not true.
Yeah. But that has nothing to do with your diagnosis of him. It can't, because you didn't use that information to assess and reach a conclusion.
Right, I didn't rely on that.
But right out of the gate, it seems you've missed what may be some important factors in reaching conclusions.
If I had said that that was a major life stressor in his life, that was a part of a trauma, then I would agree. But that's not what I said. I never mentioned that.
No, I know you didn't say it. That's why I'm asking about it. Why would you leave this out? Because you had it,
Yeah, I'm not sure I remember. I don't know why.
but it's important. You would agree.
No,
That's not important.
for what I was asked to do, looking at trauma history, etc. No, this is not.
Okay. Well, in this same page, do you see the portion where it says that one of the stressors was that law enforcement was looking for him?
Yes.
Is that important?
Important how?
Well,
we're talking about two very different
It's all
things.
kind of relative, isn't it? I mean, when I ask when something's important, I'm directly speaking to how you reached the conclusions that you did. Now, how are you asking it?
This is not
Everything I'm asking you is going to be about how you reached a conclusion.
I talked a lot about childhood trauma and how he grew up
Yeah.
and the implications of that. This does not have to do with that.
Well, you just finished talking about the deficits that are caused by stressors and things that have happened in people's lives.
Sure.
So you didn't consider what he said here, that he was stressed because law enforcement was looking for him?
This is much more about mental state at the time of the crime, which is not what I was asked to look at.
You
Right?
were
That's-
not
that's,
asked.
That's an insanity defense issue.
Okay, so just to clarify, you're not asking the court or this jury to look at his mental state at the time he murdered Sergeant Baker.
That's correct. I would have been here in first phase if that were the case.
Fair enough. So when you say it's the deficits that define the disease, you're not saying it's his deficits or disease that killed Sergeant Baker.
I'm not saying that he was insane at the time of the crime. You would have heard from me in first phase if that were the case.
Right. So we can agree that his deficits and diagnosis and disease did not kill Sergeant Baker. The defendant killed Sergeant Baker after putting 6 rounds into him, right?
That's what happened, yes.
All right. And it has nothing to do with his deficit or disease.
Well, I mean, his deficits affect his behavior, but it did not impact his legal right from wrong.
Yeah,
He acknowledged it at the time.
At all. Yeah, I mean, you watched the tape.
I did.
I mean, he went through a series of processing and events, both before and after the murder, that would clearly show that he was cognitively and physiologically functioning at a predatory apex level. Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure I would characterize it that way. He was certainly functioning. I would say there was a lot of poor planning involved, but he planned, sure. I mean,
Okay.
he took actions, sure.
All right.
I'm not saying he didn't or couldn't have from these damages.
Is down. Mental status examination. Go a little bit further down. Right there. All right, doctor. Reasoning and abstraction appears cognitively intact.
Yeah, they don't test for that, but yeah. I mean, that means he could talk to
This
them.
doctor's lying?
No, I didn't say that. They don't test for that. They talk to him, and he can answer back, and then they're going to check that box.
Okay. Intellectual functioning, at least average?
Yeah, there. Unless you do an IQ test, you don't know that. Again, is there something very, very obvious wrong with his intellect, and there wasn't, so they put that.
Fair enough. Impulse control, good.
Yeah, again, they're not going to give tests of impulsivity. They're just watching him right there in front of him at the time.
Now let's go back up to this one. Reasoning and abstraction. You said he didn't test for it, but the doctor says, as evidenced by he can explain parables.
Yeah, that's one thing. That's true, but that's there's multiple levels of abstraction. They're doing a quick mental status check. I know what they're doing, but that's not.
But you're not saying this doctor that testified here is lying.
No, I'm saying that based on the limited exam that he would have conducted, he's going to check that box. I understand why he did that.
Well, he checked it appears because the defendant can explain parables.
Yeah.
I mean, what else would it be? He can explain parables, yes or no?
According to that doctor, yes. With me, he had problems with abstraction.
And that's where I was going to next. So there's kind of a conflict in the experts, huh?
No,
No?
I do a far more extensive examination than a doctor in an emergency room. They don't have time. to
This
do
wasn't
that.
an emergency room.
Judge, I'm gonna ask again, we will let him finish his answer.
He did finish, Judge.
I understood him to finish that he was saying he had more time than the doctor in an emergency room, and I didn't know if he had more to answer. Doctor, did you have anything more to answer to that?
That I spent several hours with him doing all kinds of different screening tests, et cetera, and I know this doctor would not have done that.
So you're saying that when this doctor testified, and I think he said he spent 45 minutes to an hour in this portion of the assessment, that he did not ask him to explain parables?
That's not at all what I'm saying.
Okay. So I think we can both agree that there are two different outcomes here. One doctor heard him explain the parables, and you, in your assessment, say the defendant could not.
If he asked him one parable, I asked 5, just as an example. So I don't know how many there are. We don't know from this checkbox.
You didn't ask 5, did you?
I asked 3, I
Yeah,
believe.
your report says 3. And look, man, I'm the worst editor. Anybody in my office can tell you I can't spell very well and not good at editing. But just to clarify, your report says 3. But also you have the defendant's middle name as Blake.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
do you
clearly
even
that's-
know his middle name?
Not off the top of my head.
All right. Is that important to know, the defendant's name, to accurately assess?
The middle name? No.
Yeah, it's not? Okay. You want to confirm who you're assessing, don't you?
I know who I was assessing.
Who did the images that you reviewed?
Vanderbilt.
Which doctor?
Don't know.
Don't know? When did they occur?
I think 2020. They're on the scans.
What month?
I don't know.
Well, we've already heard one doctor say they happened in August, but we found out his report was wrong too, and they were a different month.
Whatever it says on the scan.
Well, what I'm getting to is we've heard a lot of experts kind of talking circularly, and I still haven't heard the name of the actual doctor who created these images. Do you know?
I don't know, or I've told you. I don't
So
know.
you're relying on information in the form of images that you don't know who even created them?
We often don't. I mean, that's not information. I don't care really who the doctor was that did the scan at Vanderbilt or at any hospital.
Let me
I just
get
care
this
about the
right.
scan.
You don't care who the doctor was. You don't care about the guy's middle name. Do you really care how accurate this assessment is?
Oh, I care very much. I didn't say I don't care about his middle name. I'm saying his middle name is not important to my
Okay,
assessment.
well, I agree that in your assessment, the middle name has no real meaning, but it's important to make sure you're actually conducting an interview with the defendant and not somebody named Blake.
But I clearly did
Okay.
examine
I
him.
just want to make sure. But you don't know who the doctor is that created those images?
Nope.
All right. What is, and this isn't a trick question. This is just me wanting to know. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
But I wouldn't tell you if it was a trick question. But this is.
That sounds like somebody who's doing a trick question.
Right,
So-
right. Actually, I just want to know, what does that clock mean?
So this clock is it's actually okay. It's a little bit misdrawn. I'd like to see the hands a little bit lower, and the numbers are spaced a little bit odd, but it's not bad. It's an okay test.
So did the defendant draw the clock?
Yes.
Why did you ask him to draw the clock?
I'm looking at visual-spatial issues,
Okay.
those sorts of things, frontal lobe.
And he accurately did that?
He did.
Okay.
And,
Now-
and by the way, while we're talking about my report, somehow I neglected to put that image in the report, but I also scored a test for him that he passed, but he didn't pass it. He actually failed it. As I looked at it, it was about counting the number of words that start with letter S in 1 minute. He did not do it. I reported in the report that he did it properly. He did not. So
Fair
there's
enough.
1 and 1 on that one.
I'll move that as the next exhibit.
276.
Now, Doctor, you, I believe in your materials that were provided to us, said that you had reviewed the report of Dr. Karen, is that correct?
Yes.
And can you identify this doctor? It's kind of hard to identify, right?
It is. I know what it is, but
What is it?
well, she's asked, or somebody has asked him to draw intersecting pentagons, which he has done, and then also to do a clock drawing.
And on that clock drawing, what do we see?
This is poorly done.
Yeah, he didn't fill in the whole clock, did he?
He did not, and the hands are not right.
And he left out some of the numbers?
Yes.
All right, I'll move that as the next exhibit.
77?
Thank you. So, again, doctor, I'm talking about accuracy of assessments, and just like with the clocks, the defendant, he drew 2 different clocks.
He did?
And which I'm going down the road of, we know there's deceit in his reportings and of information to the doctors, right? You agree with that?
There's inconsistencies. Sometimes there may be deceit, it may be confabulation, there can be a number of reasons.
I mean, in this one we see on the screen, he can explain parables, plural, how many ever that is, and with you, he can't explain 3 parables.
That's right.
And with Dr. Karen, he can't draw the clock, but with you, he can.
That's right.
And with Dr. Small from Middle Tennessee Mental Health, he tells the doctor he's upset because his brother had just died 2 days before. But we know that's a lie. There's actually a lot of mistruths in the defendant's reportings to all of the doctors. Is that right?
There are a number of inconsistencies, that's true.
Okay. And, of course, let's be clear. In Middle Tennessee Mental Health, the defendant was given a couple of occasions in which he was asked if there was ever any sexual abuse. And it was either a no or he did not check the box for sexual abuse.
Right.
And did he actually disclose sexual abuse to you?
No.
You're relying on someone else.
Yes.
Fair enough. Now, one thing that is clear throughout all the reports, starting with Middle Tennessee Mental Health, is scroll on down to the page that says protective factors that could decrease suicide risk. I'll stop, go back down. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm giving you bad directions here. Stop right there. Can you see this box, doctor? This stimulants box is checked.
I see it.
That's pretty clear throughout all the findings about the defendant, is that he was a user of methamphetamines.
Yes, in the last few years of his before incarceration, yes, that's right.
Yeah. And scroll down. Keep on going. Keep on going. Right there. And under this section, it says amphetamine type, substance abuse disorder, severe.
Well, yes, under bipolar disorder, yes, that's right.
Amphetamine type, substance abuse disorder, severe, and the box is checked. See that?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Again, that's one of the diagnoses he has.
Yeah, no, I understand, but, and what I'm getting to is, one theme that has been consistent in every report is his heavy use of methamphetamines.
In the last 3 to 5 years before his incarceration,
Yeah.
correct.
And that methamphetamine use causes brain damage.
No, I mean, it can.
Yeah. I'm
It
not
doesn't
saying
cause-
it created a
No,
hole.
I gotta finish, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, I'm
Right.
sorry.
It doesn't cause permanent brain damage unless you've been using it for like 10, 15 years constantly. So while it can cause some of the brain findings that we were talking about, it cannot cause all of them, and it's not consistent with that, especially years later after being clean. So sure, methamphetamine can cause brain damage, short term, but brain heals from it.
And in this same report, he reports the use of methamphetamines 2 days prior.
I'll take your word for that. If that's what he says, that's what he
Okay.
says.
Well, really, nobody has to take our word because it's an exhibit and they can all look at it. I mean,
Sure.
It is what it is. I'm almost finished. You're not saying, are you, that everybody suffering from a disease, trauma, and stressors commit murder?
No, definitely not.
No.
That's one of the first things I said was
Right.
that. That's right.
Just to make sure we're on the same page, because there's a lot of people that have disease, stresses, and trauma that do not commit murder.
Right, they've got impairments for sure, but that's right, murder is still a low incidence event overall.
And in a couple of times in your PowerPoint, you mentioned veterans. I mean, the victim in this case, Daniel Baker, was the recipient of the Purple Heart. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, I mean,
No, it's-
and he's never committed a murder.
It's horrible. The whole thing's horrible.
It is, I agree. I want to go back to your title of the deficits define the disease. What do you think about the concept of it's the balance of someone's strengths and deficits that actually define the person?
Sure, I like that.
Okay, it's not original to me. I got it from somebody else, but I like it.
You have a smart friend.
Well, I like it because, everything we've seen from the doctors so far, it's a lot of it, not with you, but a lot of the doctors have been looking at computer screens and digits and images without actually having interaction with the defendant. And even you, to some extent, are limited in your evaluation because where were you when the interview was conducted?
I was in the jail.
Yeah, I mean, it's very restricted. So don't you have to get a true assessment of somebody, see how those things are applied in life?
Yeah, but then I could never evaluate or diagnose anybody ever. I don't go home with my patients and say, hey, how are you interacting with your wife tonight? Oh, okay. And says, oh, I see. Are you kidding me? I have to rely on collateral information.
Okay.
So I look at, do other interviews, look at medical records, look at collateral sources. And that's why social history is so important, because that gets to what you're talking about, how he behaves in the real world.
Yes, sir. But an assessment, it's not just images and test scores.
No, you're right. It requires clinical correlation, and that's what I'm doing.
And in your correlations, I want to, because I'm a layman, I use a rough analogy. For example, you know what the NFL Combine is?
Sure.
What is that?
It's a series of tasks that NFL recruits or prospects are asked to go through.
Yeah. So, and I'm not an athlete, but if I were invited to the NFL Combine and I went and ran a 4.2 second 40-yard dash, would that be impressive?
Maybe you had some meth.
Yeah, maybe I had some meth. Yeah, that's what it would take for somebody fat like me to run a 4.2.
I don't see you running a 4.240.
No,
Right?
but me either ever. But a 4.2 would be outstanding. Yeah.
Be exceptional. Yeah, sure. It's great. It'd be great.
It'd be exceptional.
Yeah.
Now, me running a 4.2 in that combine, does that mean I'm going to run a 4.2 and I got all my pads on and I'm in the stress of a game?
No, it'd be harder.
It'd be harder, right?
Yeah, that's my point.
Well, but then when you see someone who's actually successful under stress, what does that mean?
Well, so what type of stress and how often and in what cases? Impulsive people aren't impulsive 100% of the time, just like depressed people are not depressed 100% of the time.
Sure.
So it depends on the stressor. It depends on what else is going on, and if there's drugs on board or if there's some other thing happening here too, right? So people can that's what I kept talking about, that the risk goes up of bad things happening under great deals of stress.
I'm with you. But in this case, and based on your review of the case, we know this wasn't impulsive, right? I mean,
I didn't analyze the mental state at the time of the crime.
Yeah.
I was not asked to do that, so
Okay.
I'm going to defer that.
well, the evidence showing that it wasn't impulsive is that 3.5 weeks prior, he said, somebody tries to arrest me, I'm going to smoke their ass.
It doesn't surprise me he'd say something like that.
So it's not impulsive. He already said he was going to do it.
I mean, look, I don't know the context under which something like that was said. People say a lot of things. I'm not sure that meant he was thinking about 3 weeks later what he'd be doing.
Well, really? Because in looking at the input of information, which is what you use to draw conclusions, you have to consider everything.
Sure, again, you're asking me to think on the fly because I don't have all the information because
Okay.
I didn't do a mental state at the time of the crime.
Fair enough.
Evaluation.
Going back to the balance, the whole person balance, I'm sure you went to medical school with folks that probably didn't pass their boards on the first try, they failed, but yet have gone on to be good doctors.
Yeah, such a thing exists. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've known some lawyers that have failed and have gone on to become good lawyers.
Sure.
Failing a test doesn't mean everything. It's not the all in all. It's one judgment or one way to evaluate something.
I mean, look, I would agree with that generally, like in an IQ test or some of these things, but neuropsychological tests are actually asking you to complete tasks, real-world kinds of things, and watch how your brain works or doesn't work. Those are actual real-world kinds of things that you have to be able to do, or if you're asked to do that. But it is actually, it's better than just like passing a test or not. But I get your point, and sure, you can do fine on a test and not do so fine in the real world, and vice versa. Sure.
Well, let's run through kind of a real-world scenario, and let's use the defendant's case. We already know that he has made statements that he's going to smoke law enforcement if someone tries to arrest him. Now, you know through your readings of the materials that the defendant knew he had active warrants for him.
Yes.
Right? That he was running from law enforcement,
Yes.
that his car was broken down,
Yes.
that he knew law enforcement had already been to his house the week prior in Dickson County on Elder Creek Road.
I'm not sure I knew that, but again, if you say that's a fact, then
Okay.
I'll go with you.
You knew, based on the case file provided to you, that the defendant, when he was approached by Sergeant Baker, was pretending that the door wouldn't open.
Yes.
You knew that there were a pair of pliers in the floorboard of the car.
Yes. I remember
You
saying
you
that.
knew that the defendant was acting like the door wouldn't open and telling Sergeant Baker that he was using pliers, would have to use pliers to open the door.
Yes, I
I mean,
remember.
this is not somebody failing under pressure. This is somebody who's taking on this act to deceive Sergeant Baker.
Potentially, yes. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, he's not losing it under stress. He's performing and well.
I don't know. I don't know if that's a good performance, but
Well,
he's under stress.
Let's put it this way: the performance was good enough for what his plan was.
I'm not really clear on.
You're not clear on that?
plan.
Okay. He was cool enough under pressure that he lied about his name.
He did.
He told him he was Scott.
Yes.
He was cool enough under pressure that he came up with a fake Social Security number,
Yes, I do remember that in the interrogation.
which goes back to some of the other experts who. But he remembered a Social Security number.
Yeah, but it depends on how long he had rehearsed that or
Okay.
knew about it from before, if
Well-
he's used it before, et cetera.
Fair enough. In the law enforcement interview after his arrest, which lasted about 2 hours, he was able to tell the same version of events over and over after breaks in time.
Yeah.
He consistently told the lie about using the pliers and that the door was broken.
Right. Well, what do you mean?
Well-
He kept repeating the story.
Yeah,
right?
here's what I'm saying. In your evaluation of him, you said that he couldn't repeat the same short story after a period of time.
No, there are several. I give him a story. There's about 10 details you have to remember from it, and you're supposed to be able to remember those details. That's what he couldn't do.
But when we watched that video and the interview with this man right here, he could remember all of his lies in this tale or short story and repeated them several times to law enforcement.
Yeah, it's not the same test, but sure.
Okay.
I agree.
Judge, may we approach?
Did the defendant remove a weapon on that day
Yes.
that was concealed?
Yes.
Did he wait for Sergeant Baker to reholster his weapon?
I don't know that detail.
Okay. Did he wait for Sergeant Baker to walk all the way around the car and to get into line sight through the passenger window?
I believe so.
Did he shoot Sergeant Baker through the window?
Yes. That's my understanding.
Did he then get out of the door that he lied and said wasn't working?
I mean, if that's what you say happened.
Okay.
Again, I did not analyze the case for that.
Did he then walk back and at 2 to 3 foot range shoot Sergeant Baker in the head?
Yes.
Did he then load Sergeant Baker into his patrol vehicle?
Yes.
Did he drive down the road?
Yes.
Did he use the radio and cell phone of Sergeant Baker?
I think he received a call.
He
if I
received a
remember
call on Sergeant Baker's phone.
right. Yes.
He pretended to be Sergeant Baker.
Yes.
He drove off into a field.
Right.
He then set fire to Sergeant Baker.
That's what I understand.
He eluded law enforcement, a massive amount of law enforcement, for 2 days.
Yes, I think he went into a creek.
I mean, that's pretty good for somebody with a hole in their head, isn't it?
Again, it's not a zero. It's not. You can't do anything. I
Oh,
tell you,
okay.
this is not a great plan.
Well,
Again,
he
this is-
can. Go ahead.
This is not a. There's planning and there's poor planning and there's decision making. I mean, he's. So again, I'm not contesting what you say clearly. And a person with brain damage can do the things you said they can do. Again, I did not do an insanity evaluation.
I'll pass the witness.
Mr. Evans?
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Agharkar, there's no question that what Stephen Wiggins did to Sergeant Baker was absolutely horrible, wasn't it?
It's a terrible crime all the way around. Are you kidding me? It's terrible. It's just, and I'm sorry, I'm fogging up. It just.
Is that a question?
Yeah, I said, wasn't it? I'll speak up, though.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir. Does that change your opinion about the fact that Stephen Wiggins has brain damage?
No, the two things, no, he has brain damage. There's no question in my mind. The imaging, the testing, my examination, it all lines up.
All right. Regardless of any kind of meth use, does he in fact have a hole in his brain that is congenital?
Absolutely. It looks like he was born with this, yes.
Okay. You said something about, there's a lot of discussion about this issue with information given to the doc at Middle Tennessee Mental Health Institute about his brother being
Yes.
died. Now, first of all, have you ever heard anybody refer to friends or close friends of theirs as brothers?
Yeah, that's true. Mhm.
And do you know whether or not Mr. Wiggins was referring to one of those individuals on that morning? Do you have any idea?
I don't have any idea.
Okay.
It could be, but I don't know.
But at least we know that in that report you just saw, he didn't say my brother Scotty, correct?
Right.
Okay. And we know that his brother Scotty is alive, is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, you testified on cross about, I think you said it wouldn't surprise me if Mr. Wiggins was saying things that weren't true.
Right.
Why?
Because people with memory impairment, people with frontal lobe impairment, they can remember point A and they can remember point B, but between the two things is sometimes fuzzy. And so they fill stuff in that seems to make sense to them. That's called confabulation. And people with his kind of brain impairment can confabulate. So in other words, they can kind of make up stuff that sounds good. And if it passes, then they're like, okay, good, that worked, you know? But they don't actually really remember. So it may or may not be lying. I'm not saying people with brain damage can't lie. Of course they can lie. But it doesn't always have to be a lie.
So there are times, without doubt, that Mr. Wiggins can be lying, straight up lying.
Of course, sure.
But is it your opinion that based on the type of damage he has to his frontal lobe, that in certain instances it could be this confabulation that you're speaking of?
That's right.
Now, you also said something about poor choices.
Right.
And this idea of executive function and making poor decisions, right? Is that indicative of right frontal lobe damage?
Frontal lobe damage generally. Right frontal, we think, does more nonverbal, so social judgment, social cues, being able to read environments and read people and say and do appropriate things. That's impaired, so that's right.
And with that impairment, with that damage, does that mean you can't take action or you can't plan?
No, you can do those things, just not necessarily well.
And you talk about the brakes. How does that impulsivity, how does that play in?
So it can mean that once you get going, it's hard to stop. You know, it's hard to calm your system down, like I say, from trauma. Also, as I say, once your emotional centers start going, your frontal lobes don't brake the way they're supposed to brake, and so brake like car brakes. So they don't. You just kind of keep going, can't stop yourself once you get going.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Anything further? Thank you, Doctor. You may step down, and you are released from your subpoena.
Thank you.
I believe, Mr. Evans, you indicated earlier this was your final witness for today, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and adjourn for today. So if you'll step across, we will see you in the morning, 9 o'clock. And also, just remember my instructions not to discuss this case among yourselves with anyone. Let anyone talk to you about it, okay? All right, not holding you to it, but how many more witnesses do we anticipate?
You give me one
Sure.
second, Your Honor, I can double check. I think approximately 8 witnesses, Your Honor, but several of them will be short.
All right, so you think most of the day tomorrow then?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. All right, we had anticipated it would take about 3 days, and that looks like that's what is going to happen. All right, then we will, anything before we adjourn? All right, then we'll be in we'll adjourn until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
All rise. This court is adjourned.